Hello, my fellow strawmen, and welcome back to the Fields of Hay. Today I want to address one of the oldest sets of arguments used by theists, and particularly by Catholics, Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. I understand that they are meant more as a foundation for faith than a rigorous proof of God's existence, but since they take the form of logical syllogisms, I think they're fair game for critique. Of course, the original is in Latin, so I'll post a link here and in the comments to the translation I'm using if you'd like to follow along. If you think it's a bad translation or that I've just misinterpreted it, be sure to leave me a comment below. The first way is of motion. It starts with, all bodies are either potentially in motion or actually in motion. The terminology is old, but I understand this to mean that motion is either defined or to be defined. Actual motion is when the state is defined here in the present as the way an object really is acting, while potential motion would then refer to the many different states of motion that an object could logically be in. Premise 2 goes on, but nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. So far I agree. It is essentially claiming that causality is real, and that things which actually existed in the past lead to one particular state out of the many possible in the present. Premises 3, 4, and 5 then say, nothing can be at once in both actuality and potentiality in the same respect. Therefore nothing can be at once in both actuality and potentiality with respect to motion. Therefore nothing can move itself, it must be put into motion by something else. I understand these premises to be saying that no cause can be its own effect, and so no object could cause its own motion. Not only do I agree with this, but I even find it to be an archaic sort of version of Newton's first law, pointing to the necessity of an outside force to change something's motion. Premise 6 is when everything falls apart. It states that if there were no first mover moved by no other, there would be no motion. This is simply an argument from incredulity that undeservedly throws out the possibility of an infinite regress in causality. It also misses out on Newton's third law, which would imply that things can cause each other to move, even if they can't move themselves. The effects of this error are clear when considering the final premise and conclusion. They say that there is motion, and therefore that there must be a first mover. These are logically valid, but they follow from the faulty premise 6. As such, the conclusion is in blatant contradiction with premise 5, and less clearly in contradiction with premise 3. 5 states that nothing can move itself, and yet this is exactly what a first mover is. You can also think of a first mover as something whose potential must be actual, which goes against 3's statement that nothing can be at once both actual and potential. The first way is a mess. Aquinas simply throws away the option of infinite regress without explaining why, and I think it's because he didn't want to accept the logical conclusion that there is no first mover. If I may take a moment to relate this to my argument of ice, premise 3 is that the fundamental thing must have zero entropy. I think this is a similar idea to something whose potential is its actual. Entropy can be thought of as a count of the potential states, which are macroscopically indistinguishable from the actual state. Anything with non-zero entropy would have multiple potential states, and would require something actual to choose which state to actualize. But zero entropy corresponds to a single potential state, which could be actualized uncaused. I think this wording of my argument is a bit imprecise, but to put it into Aquinas' terms, it gets the point across. If you want the full clarification, I recommend you go watch my video, I'll link here. Aquinas' second and third ways have similar issues, so I'll move through them quickly. Premise 1 of the second way states that nothing is the efficient cause of itself, and premise 2 states that if A is the efficient cause of B and A is absent, then so is B. So far so good. However, premise 3 makes the same mistake. It states that efficient causes are ordered from first cause through intermediate causes to ultimate effect. In essence, it simply asserts that there is a first cause, and unjustifiably throws away the possibility of an eternal regress of intermediate causes. In fact, a first cause is something which is the efficient cause of itself, and is in contradiction with premise 1. Thus, the second way falls apart. The third way makes it to premise 4 before making the same error, this time in the form, it is impossible for contingent beings always to exist, for that which cannot be at some time is not. Once again, it simply asserts that an infinite regress is impossible without justification. This way comes with another error as well. I would actually agree with the conclusion that something necessary exists, but there is no reason to call this necessity God. Various arrangements of matter are contingent, but the underlying matter itself, or rather the mass energy, would be the necessary being in my view. There's no need to attach an agency to it. Before I get to the last 2 ways, this gets at a problem that the first 4 of them have. When I deny the existence of a God, I'm denying that I and the universe were created by some intelligence. God isn't just the placeholder term for whatever caused the universe. I only think that cause would be worthy of being considered a God if it is an agent in its own right. But these first 4 ways don't even address such a thing. Even if there is no infinite regress and there is a first cause, what does that have to do with the cause being intelligent? I agree that there must be some necessary thing, but why is the necessary thing necessarily intelligent? What does being most good have to do with creation? At best, these ways are only vaguely hand-waving in God's direction. And speaking of the fourth, and in my opinion the worst way, it goes like this. Premise 1 states that there is a gradation to be found in things. Some are better than others. I agree, although I would caveat that not all gradations are objective. Premise 2 goes on to claim that things are x in proportion to how closely they resemble that which is most x. This is a silly statement. For example, temperature gradations are generally measured based on two constant temperatures, such as the boiling and freezing points of pure water. There is no need to state that there must be a maximum temperature, or that we measure temperatures in proportion to this maximum. The same goes for brightness. It is essentially just counting how many photons there are. The more photons, the brighter it is. There isn't some maximum possible number of photons. And it gets worse for subjective things. When I consider how good something is, I'm just considering its pros and cons, as interpreted through my very personal and subjective worldview. I don't need some conceptual reference of something which is the most good. Moving on, premises 3 and 4 are logically valid, stating that if there is nothing which is most x, then there can be nothing which is x. There are things which are x in this world, so there must be something which is the most x. Unfortunately, these two premises are built on the faulty premise 2 and so fall apart. Premise 5 isn't even valid. It states that there must be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection. But why can't there be multiple somethings? Surely the thing which is the most hot isn't the same thing as the thing which is the most cold. Surely the thing which is the most good isn't the same thing as the thing which is the most bad. And so the fourth way falls by the wayside. The fifth way is the first argument that actually concludes in an intelligent director of all things. Premise 1 starts that we observe natural bodies act towards ends. Fair enough. If a bird puts a nest together, there is an end goal of having a safe shelter for the baby. Or if I go out for food, there is the end goal of getting the enjoyment of a good meal and preventing myself from feeling hunger. But I will caveat that not all things have ends. An earthquake shifts rock around with no plan. Solar flares fling vast quantities of hot gas from the sun, but not for any purpose. So one would be better worded as some natural bodies act towards ends. Premise 2 then states that anything which acts towards an end either acts out of knowledge or under the direction of something with knowledge. I can agree with this, as only an intelligence could plan out some kind of end goal. Premise 3 goes on to say that many natural beings lack knowledge, which I must agree with unless I want to say that rocks or fire have knowledge. But you may notice that the same actions which lack knowledge are the same ones that are without an end goal. This makes the conclusion a non sequitur. It claims that some intelligent being must exist by whom all natural things are directed towards their end. But we simply see no purposeful actions which are missing an intelligent source, and so nothing to explain with a god. And thus the only of the five ways which even could point to God fails to reach its end. And so I find none of the five ways convincing. They are fallacy-ridden and do nothing to show how God must logically exist. Rather, they only show how desperate Aquinas was to reach his desired conclusion. If you don't want to end up like Aquinas, go read a fucking book.